Right now, as you're watching this, there are countries you've probably never thought twice about that are quietly amassing weapons, arsenals that would make Cold War superpowers jealous. We're not talking about the usual suspects here. These are nations flying completely under the radar, while they prepare for a conflict most people don't even see coming. And here's the kicker. Some of these countries don't even make the top 10 in most military rankings. But they're spending billions, stockpiling everything from missiles to drones to cyber weapons, and they're doing it so quietly that by the time the world notices, it might already be too late. The question isn't if they're preparing for World War III, the question is why nobody's talking about it. Look, when most people think about World War III preparation, their minds immediately go to the United States, Russia, China, maybe NATO. Those are the obvious players, right? But that's exactly what makes this situation so insane. While everyone's watching the giants posture and flex, there's a whole other game happening in the shadows. Countries like Poland have literally tripled their defense budgets in the last 3 years. We're talking about a nation that's now spending more on defense as a percentage of GDP than almost anyone in NATO. They're not just buying tanks, they're creating entire armored divisions from scratch. Why? Because they're sitting right next to a potential flashpoint, and they've decided they're not going to be caught unprepared when things go sideways. But Poland's just the beginning. South Korea has been on an absolute weapons buying spree that would make arms dealers weep with joy. They're not just stockpiling for themselves either. They've become one of the world's largest weapons exporters, basically overnight, which tells you something wild about their production capacity. They're pumping out tanks, artillery systems, and fighter jets like they're preparing for something way bigger than just keeping North Korea in check. And honestly, they probably are. Because here's where it gets crazy. South Korea knows that any major conflict in Asia doesn't stay contained. If China moves on Taiwan, if North Korea does anything stupid, if tensions in the South China Sea explode, they're going to be right in the middle of it, whether they like it or not. Then you've got countries like Finland and Sweden, who literally just joined NATO after decades of neutrality. Think about that for a second. These nations spent the entire Cold War staying out of military alliances, and now they're jumping in with both feet. Finland shares an 830-mile border with Russia, and they're not taking any chances. They've got one of the most robust civil defense systems on the planet, with enough shelter space for their entire population. They've been quietly preparing their citizens for total war scenarios with actual instruction manuals on what to do when conflict breaks out. Not if, when. Sweden's doing something even more interesting. They've reactivated military bases that have been dormant since the 90s, brought back mandatory military service, and they're fortifying the island of Gotland in the Baltic Sea like it's the most strategic piece of real estate on Earth, which, real talk, it basically is. Whoever controls Gotland controls access to the Baltic, and that means controlling supply lines to multiple NATO countries. The Swedes know this, the Russians know this, and that's why Sweden's been low-key militarizing that island with advanced anti-ship missiles and air defense systems that could turn the Baltic into a no-go zone for any hostile force. Now let's talk about the Middle East, because this is where things get seriously complicated. You've got countries like the UAE and Saudi Arabia that have been stockpiling advanced Western weapon systems for years. But recently they've diversified their suppliers in ways that should make everyone nervous. They're buying from the US, sure, but also from France, from South Korea, even from China. They're building domestic weapons industries, investing in drone technology, and creating military capabilities that go way beyond what they'd need for regional conflicts. The Gulf states are preparing for a scenario where they can't rely on American protection, where they need to stand on their own in a multipolar world war scenario. Iran's been doing its own thing too, and it's arguably more dangerous because it's happening under sanctions. They've become incredibly good at producing cheap, effective drones and missiles, and they've been spreading that technology to proxies across the region. We're talking about a distributed weapons network that doesn't need fancy factories or huge budgets. It's asymmetric warfare stockpiling, and in a World War III scenario, that kind of capability could absolutely wreak havoc on traditional military forces. Here's what makes all of this so wild. These countries aren't preparing for some abstract future conflict. They're preparing for specific scenarios they see coming. Poland's getting ready for Russian aggression, spreading beyond Ukraine. South Korea's preparing for a Pacific theater conflict. Finland and Sweden are fortifying the Baltic approach. The Gulf states are hedging against great power competition in their backyard. Every single one of them has looked at the current trajectory of global tensions and decided that sitting around hoping for peace is a sucker's bet. And you know what the craziest part is? The weapons they're stockpiling aren't just traditional military hardware. We're talking about cyber weapons, satellite killer capabilities, electronic warfare systems, and AI-driven autonomous weapons that can make decisions faster than any human commander. The next World War isn't going to look like World War II or even the Gulf War. It's going to be fought across multiple domains simultaneously, and these silent powers know it. They're not just buying bullets and tanks. They're investing in the technologies that will define 21st century warfare. The economic implications alone are staggering. Global defense spending hit over $2 trillion last year, and a huge chunk of that is coming from countries that weren't major military spenders a decade ago. That's money not going into infrastructure, education, or healthcare. It's going into preparing for mass destruction. And the fact that so many nations have made this calculation simultaneously should tell you something about how they see the future. What does this mean for the rest of us? It means the world is collectively preparing for a conflict that nobody wants to name, but everyone sees coming. These silent powers aren't being paranoid. They're being realistic about a global order that's fracturing, about alliances that might not hold, about a future where neutrality might not be an option. They've looked at history and decided they'd rather be overprepared than caught off guard when the shooting starts. The real question isn't whether these countries are right to stockpile weapons. The question is what happens when everyone's armed to the teeth with nowhere to back down. Because history shows us that when nations prepare for war, sometimes the preparation itself becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. The weapons exist, the plans are drawn, the triggers are sensitive, and all it takes is one miscalculation, one accident, one leader who thinks they can win quickly before things escalate. We're living in a world where the silent powers aren't silent about their intentions anymore. They're just quiet about how ready they actually are.